Welcome to the Live Well, Perform Better podcast, brought to you by Below the Line. My name is David Duggan, and I am part of a team made up of experts from the worlds of business, elite sport, adventure, and health and well-being. We are coaches, mentors, and advisors to some of the world's biggest companies and organizations, as well as smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, and people looking to make their mark on the world. Our guiding mantra at Below the Line is Live Well, Perform Better. What does that mean, you might ask? Good question. Maybe the easiest way to describe it from our perspective is finding the formula that works for you when it comes to things like looking after your physical and mental health, running your business, developing your career, leading your people, or simply being able to show up as brilliantly as possible into your own life, both for yourself and those around you. That's why each week I sit down with a member of our team or an invited guest for a conversation that focuses on the question, what do the words live well, perform better mean to you? This question is a way into exploring with people from a range of different backgrounds, industries and disciplines. What are the practices, techniques, habits or ideas that they use to help them to show up and be at their best in all areas of their lives, whether that's as CEOs, leaders or managers, or as parents, family members or friends. We keep it short and sweet so that you can extract all the good stuff and get on with the rest of your day, and hopefully put some of this knowledge, experience and expertise into play for yourself. This week I am delighted to welcome another very special guest, Carroll of Project Unbound. Initially beginning her working life in marketing, Claire's career trajectory is one that has followed the developments and innovations in technology that have defined our lives over the past 20 years. And in that time, she has worked in and held leadership roles in areas ranging from online marketing and the attention economy to persuasive design and understanding people's behaviour in the online world. It is these experiences that have led Claire to what she is now doing, which is working as a consultant in ethics and technology, where she is exploring some of the most challenging questions at the interface between technology and human behaviour. A voracious reader, a deep thinker, and an eloquent speaker, Claire gave me a fascinating insight into her own story, her own coaching journey and the impact it has had on her life, as well as the meaning and purpose that is driving her work on the frontiers of the technological revolution we are continuing to live through. This was a great conversation with someone who was willing to talk candidly and openly about the challenge of personal growth, and how and why doing what she describes as the work on herself has made all the difference to who she is today and what she is doing now. Please subscribe at www.belowtheline.ie, where you can stay up to date with the podcast, as well as exclusive online events and sessions, including our Press Pause coaching community and our story coaching programs. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. But look, I'll just kick in with the first question, which is, please tell me, why do you do what you do?
It's such a loaded question, that one. It definitely, you definitely kind of made me stop in my tracks when I read it and really started to think about it, because it's pretty confronting. It really kind of gets to the heart of why I do what I do every day. So my main interest, David, is in the area of ethics and technology. And so I've worked over the last approximately 20 years in the area of technological innovation, and with a kind of a marketing background. And I suppose when I look back on, my career, it was kind of in keeping pace with the trajectory of the web and what was happening in the world of digital media, as we were all kind of getting to grips with the exciting new world of everyone having broadband and internet and smartphones and all that fun stuff. But I was also, I suppose, part of a Wild West system that was really driving what is now known as the attention economy. And it was driving it through the techniques of what's known as persuasive design. So I suppose really just trying to persuade people to engage with certain content in order to click on something, which was likely some type of sponsored content or an ad. And then that obviously drove revenue and profits for advertisers and for tech platforms. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a free market economy. And but I think what we've seen, if you go back to Tim Berners-Lee, who was the guy that invented the web in its current format, you go back 30 years ago to what his mission and ambition for the web was, I think we've gone seriously off-road relative to the principles of openness, access, and I suppose not having such a profit-driven agenda. within the internet economy. And so, even as recently as the other day, Joe Biden's State of the Union address directly correlates the mental health crisis amongst the youth in the United States with social media. And so I've been part of this system that to some extent co-created that context. And I was in very senior leadership roles in digital agencies. And at the time, it was all just gravy. It was just a gold rush, and I'm talking about kind of 2005 to 2015. And then, of course, the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. And it wasn't new news to me. I had written a blog post in 2008 making the kind of, it wasn't a plea, but it was kind of asking the industry, should Facebook be a utility? And that was only a couple of years after Facebook had gone public, as in public outside of Harvard. It wasn't actually launched as a public company for a few years later. And so I was naturally ridiculed and kind of laughed out of the place. But it did concern me even back then that the usage of social networking platforms was becoming so prolific that it was beyond just, an interesting place to spend time. And so with all of these, I suppose, problems that we're now faced with, we have a lot of rebalancing to do. And the piece that's missing is the role of ethics in the design of technology, in its development, and in its longer term governance. And that can get misconstrued with, killing all the fun and wanting to police it and slow it down. And, we can't move fast and break things if you've got an ethicist at the table. And yet I think we've broken plenty. And now we realize that actually it's not about slowing innovation down or stifling it, but it's about having different voices at the table, including philosophers, social psychologists, ethicists, to try and help us, have a more balanced context for which we can all participate and have access, but not necessarily be staring down the barrel of what are extremely serious problems in content moderation, in addiction, and by way of, biases in terms of machine learning, and how we need to navigate that. So yeah, that's kind of where my main interest lies. And the last few years I was with a big management consulting firm and got to do some really interesting work. Because I walked away from the digital media marketing world to some extent, and I built a portfolio in the area of data privacy and what does data privacy need to look like in terms of digital identity systems and what some emerging technologies that may hit or may not. But ultimately, it was about, I suppose, having a wonderful opportunity to kick around in a sandbox and prototype some of that. And some of the work was brought to the United Nations, was presented at the World Economic Forum, was published in the Harvard Business Review. So I was really lucky to get to work with such brilliant people and meet some fantastic people throughout that experience. And so, yeah, I suppose why I do what I do is driven by a degree of insight from my experience and wanting to rebalance those scales.
It sounds to me like that blog post from 2008, it's never left your mind, if you like, but it's now what's potentially really driving what you're doing now.
Yes, and it's really important to say, I don't want to be overly diplomatic in this, this is not binary. These companies, Google, Facebook, TikTok, all of them, there are a number of them that are considered to be under the banner of big tech, Apple, Amazon, we know them all. They're not bad or good. And I think it's important that we don't vilify them. There's some fantastically talented people with the right intentions working there, but this is about a systemic approach to kind of rebalancing this. So yes, that I suppose the impetus behind that blog post hasn't left me, and yet I also see the fantastic upside of what these companies do. They drive microeconomies in emerging markets. There are so many small to medium enterprises all over the world that wouldn't be in existence or wouldn't have the growth they've had without these companies. So this is complex, and it's important, I think, that we have a level of collaboration and respect amongst all the people involved to try and figure it out, because the nature of the time we're living through at the moment means that things are very polarized. So you're either on one side or the other, and we know that that's ironically exacerbated by social media. So that's not helpful. That's not going to get us anywhere. And so I think, yeah, I think I do think there's good intentions and appetite for this, but also I think it is going to take regulation. It's not unlike big oil or big tobacco, and we can see the regulation coming. And so I think there's a new chapter ahead where this will start to flourish in terms of the role of ethics and responsibility in tech design.
If I move on to my next question, then the below the line strap line that we have is this idea of live well and perform better. And part of my reason for doing this podcast is to talk to people like you and find out what does that mean to you. So I'd love to hear your take on what that means to you.
I think for me it means, and what I'm going to say now is absolutely not what I would have said 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So it was interesting as I thought about this to even observe how I'm answering it differently today. But for me, live well and perform better means being open and curious and as unattached to outcomes as I can be. And that's a difficult place for me to try and hold. But I think that is when I'm at my best, and it allows me to focus on what's important to me. But I don't believe in being able to live well and perform better without honing the skills of what it means to confront your inner pain. And so, if we accept that there is a law of nature that says that to gain strength, you have to push your limits, which is painful, but it's the premise of a growth mindset. And, corporate culture in the last 10 years or 8 years since Carol Dweck wrote her book and Angela Duckworth wrote that book, Grit, and Adam Grant talks a lot about growth mindset. And everyone's really, really behind it. There's no end to the bandwagon on growth mindsets. But I think in order to really get to that place and be conditioned for that, you have to be able to work through the eye of the needle on a lot of stuff that's difficult for you and painful and be held accountable to it. And I met with your great colleague and my wonderful coach Dave Gribben recently, and I've worked with Dave for 11 years. And he said to me, if you were to go back to when you were leaving corporate life, 18 months ago, after 17 years, what advice do you think you'd give yourself now? And I said, I'd probably say to myself, don't start asking what it is you want to do. Because I kind of had this blank canvas, and I wasn't leaving to go somewhere. It was like I just need to take some time out and decide what I'm going to do next. And I said, I think I'd go back and I'd tell myself, how much pain are you willing to tolerate to figure this out? Because it's been so difficult, at times, and of course it is. That's the nature of a transition. It's the nature of uncertainty, and it's the nature of getting good at about accepting confusion, and you don't get anywhere without that. So I think I'm not then I was thinking, maybe the strapline should be hurt well, live better. I don't think that will sell much though. As a marketer, I don't think I'd advocate that, but there is something I think about the need to, like, sometimes all this stuff can get marketed with all the upside. And there's no real kind of consideration given to what does it take to actually be able to hone a growth mindset or to be in a place of, better performance. And I think the bit that none of us really want to talk about is being able to tackle that the more difficult aspects of your character, your behaviors, your attitudes, or how you're showing up, or whatever it is. And the other side of it, I think, as well, is that we live in a Western culture driven by individualism and this kind of incessant need to optimize for self-actualization. And, I have invested a huge amount in myself. So, I don't want to be hypocritical in what I'm saying, but the bit that makes me nervous that I've seen a lot of is when you want to perform really well, but you're not prepared to authentically elevate other people. And I don't believe you can be a high performer without doing that. So, and I think that goes back to that culture of kind of ego and self-actualization. And I think it's difficult to talk about it without talking about privilege. We live in the top, 20% of people on the planet who have the privilege to be able to think about what it means to live well and perform better. And I think, I just think we need to be careful, because there's lots of people that don't have the same access to resources, and they're not in the same system or paradigm that maybe you and I and others are in. And so if they don't make it, does that mean they failed? Does that mean that they're not going to realize their full potential? So yeah, I think it's just a balance between, I think, high performance of the self, but then also elevating other people with authenticity, and not in a way that's in any other way that could be misconstrued as anything as authentic. Because there's plenty of examples where people push other people forward, or try to hold other people up, but it's not legitimate. So, and I think on the performance side, I grew up in a family of medical people. Everyone in the family is pretty much medical, parents and grandparents, which was an amazing environment to grow up in, because it was full of kind of just unconditional compassion and care and work, a very strong work ethic. But there was also a big creativity aspect to it, because we're a very musical family. So I know all about performance. What does it mean to perform? And I'm very lucky. I was born with a musical ear, so I can play by ear, as well as being kind of classically trained in a few instruments. And I suppose that means that you end up, I think it means you're a really good listener. I'm a very good listener. There's plenty of things I'm not good at, but I'm a very good listener. And I think if you're going to play by ear, play improv, you're always listening kind of horizontally and vertically to different layers and different vibrations. And I think it can help with performance. But again, if we're talking about external performance, I can use it to manipulate a situation. I know how to hold a room. And I think, again, you have to go back to that question: who are you performing for, and to what end? And I think it's important. That was another thing about corporate life that I was very good at, but I didn't really enjoy it. It's the nature of working in a large organization anywhere, is that, you have to, there's a performative nature to what you're doing. You need to market yourself, you need to market your work, you need to market your team and your ambition. And I didn't really enjoy it enough to sustain it. And I felt that I was kind of abandoning a version of my own self for the comfort of other people, in order to fulfill their expectations. So, I've probably gone too analytical on it, but I think performance can be a double-edged sword. I just think you need to be really clear and careful about, what the performance is all about.
I'm trying now to kind of join some dots between, you mentioned, you've worked with Dave Gribben on coaching. You've spoken about confronting inner pain, and you've also spoken about living now without trying to live more without attachment. So I'm just wondering, could you just articulate for me, or just give me your experience of what has it been like to confront some of that inner pain, and how that translates to trying to live now without attachment?
Yeah, I have to say, one of the greatest experiences of my, I'd say professional career, but really of my life, has been working with Dave. And he's enormously talented, and it's just wonderful at holding me accountable to myself. And so, to answer your question, I think one example is, when I was getting very kind of caught up and bent out of shape, as Dave says, working in a company a few years ago. And I was sitting with Dave, and I was explaining to him where I was at, and he was trying to understand my kind of the behaviors that was driving what I was saying, and my mindset. And one of the things he said to me that has always stuck with me, and I think about it every week, is, I was complaining, and giving out. And he said to me, what role are you playing in co-creating this context? And to which, of course, I was slightly horrified that he would suggest that I was part of any of this. But it was really useful as a question, because it forced me to really see myself on the same playing field with all these other people, And I suppose, I'm sure you're familiar with the trauma triangle of where, the victim, villain, hero. And it's really useful construct to use to try and understand, okay, if I'm feeling like a victim, then what do I need to do to flip that? To change, to not just to change the narrative, but to really change my behavior and change my mindset. So, every week I do a lot of journaling. And then that was a question that I started to ask myself every week was, if I'm feeling like X or Y, and I have evidence to prove that that's real, then what role am I playing in co-creating that? And Dave will say that I am, on a bad day, overly analytical. So I have to be careful not to go too deep into the weeds. But I think it's really refreshing because it allows you to stand outside yourself. And, I think if you're up for being honest with yourself and learning, because really that's what drives it. It's the curiosity and the learning to understand how I can, be improving my sense of self and getting feedback from people, going actively. I had to go out and talk to loads of people. Then Dave said to me, it would be helpful actually if you sat down with these 3 people and you spoke to them about these things. And then another piece of advice he gave me at the time, which was just fantastic, and it totally changed everything for me, was you need to sit down and recalibrate 3 or 4 of these relationships. You just need to sit down and recontract with these people. And there was most of the stuff, like I think an awful lot of these problems, certainly in the working world, are kind of implicit. There had been no event, there was no major issue. It was just messy and stuff had gotten lost in translation over time. So I sat down and I recalibrated these relationships, and I, said, here's what you can expect from me. Here's what I expect of you. And you can call me out on these things. And guess what? I'm going to call you out on those things. And so everybody signed up to it. And it was a really simple, half an hour lunch with all these people, with these various, very different people. But it was just incredible what it, I suppose, yielded and unlocked for me.
And also, you spoke earlier as well about elevating other people. And I'm sure through that process, even that's a way that you can elevate people. But that's also not being prepared to even consider elevating others until you've taken a look at yourself and your behaviors and how you're showing up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the humility in that, and I've done a lot of work with Dave on understanding what my values are and, really getting clear about them. And one of them, is humility. And my number one is integrity. So, I have to then be accountable on every side of the equation if I'm really going to try and, I suppose, honor those values and then live a life that I feel is one of contentment and fulfillment based on that. So yeah.
Picking up on the living with less attachment, how's that playing out for you, or how's that working?
Oh, yeah, it's like a major rewiring of the operating system. Because when you're not working for yourself, it's really clear what the outcomes and the goals need to be, right? And it's usually aligned to quarterly earnings or whatever it is. And I was operating at a pretty senior level in most of the organizations I was at. So I suppose 17 years of being wired and trained that way to then suddenly start to think about not being attached to outcomes. And David's, we had spoken a lot about it over the years, but it's very difficult to be in one system where the whole incentive system is designed in such a way that your survival can be dependent on you making sure that you are very wired to all of these outcomes. So to suddenly to try and let go of that is difficult when you're inside it. So now that I'm outside of a large organization, it's very confronting. It's very difficult. It demands a level of, I suppose, being philosophical that is, again, not really in keeping with the times that we're in, because we're a culture driven by busyness and productivity. And so it's all about, what you're delighted to announce on LinkedIn, every 2 weeks, or else you're probably not doing much or no need to pay attention to you. So it's going back. I think it's been about going back to what am I motivated by? and I'm motivated intrinsically. I'm not motivated by externalization or accolades, or and it's fine for people who are, but I'm not. So that probably makes it a little bit easier to not be attached to certain outcomes. But I would be lying if I said that I haven't felt very, very down at times, and very despairing and very upset at times when certain things in the last 18 months haven't panned out the way I had hoped, because it's something in a massive conflict with this idea, isn't there? Like we are wired as people to be focusing on progress and some level of creativity. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you're probably creating something for progress. And that's ultimately goal orientated. And so suddenly to then say, you can have a goal, you can't be emotionally attached to the outcome as to whether it happens or not, kind of feels like I need to train to be a Buddhist monk, So, but I think the general thrust of the intention is very valuable. And I have, it's amazing because it brings you to all sorts of interesting places and people when you do let go of certain expectations. And I think I've really enjoyed that, but it's very difficult. Every day I have to remind myself about it and work on it actively. So it's very, very deliberate work. It's not coming quite naturally to me just yet.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that we as human beings like is certainty. We like predictability, we like certainty, and when we don't get it, that can be really tricky for us. But I'm also, it's interesting what you said about music, and and a classical piece of music, the music is written out, it never changes. You put it in front of you, and if you're able to sight read, and if you have that skill, which is a fantastic skill, you can do it. But you take that away and you say, here's a couple of chords, find your way, but you're very at home in that space too. So it's almost like it's almost like you're just learning to bring more of that into quote unquote normal life, if you like.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a great. It is a really good analogy, and I think I've rarely taken a pre-existing role in my career. I've always been in the new role, doing the new thing for the new thing that we're not quite sure about, and we don't really have a job description. So if you could just get in there and figure that out for us, that'd be great. Thanks. So yeah, I think having that sense of improvisation and a level of I suppose risk taking. That I can be very risk averse about many things, but that's not one thing that I feel particularly kind of threatened by. And it also reminds me of this really interesting thought experiment that I came across when I was, I took a few months off when I first stepped away from my previous role. And, Dave had been saying to me, you need to ask yourself, what's important to you in this life? What life do you want to live? And I came across this thought experiment by a contemporary philosopher called Roman Krznaric, I think is his name. I'm sure that's his name, but I'm sure I've mispronounced it, so I apologize. And his philosophy is all around what does it mean to be a good ancestor? And so he says, you're going to die. And in the immediate aftermath of passing on from this world, you're going to go to a dinner party in your afterlife. And around the table of that dinner party is all the versions of you that could have been. And the question is, who do you want to sit beside? And it was probably before I decided to leave, and I was thinking about, where am I going? What am I doing? It was just a really powerful way of setting out, we have approximately 4,000 weeks on this planet. And if I want to recalibrate my relationship with time, which I think many of us need to do just in terms of the spirit of focus and getting the right things out of your experience of life. It was brilliant. And people I've told about it since, they get really, I think people get really stressed when they hear there's a dinner party and they think, there's all these people around the table and you're going to have to choose, but it's actually just different versions of who you could have been. So yeah, it was another useful way to think about, what direction do I want to go in, but not be overly attached to a particular outcome.
You mentioned journaling is something that you do weekly, but I'm just wondering, are there any other practices, habits, behaviors that you engage in to help you, with this idea of living well, performing better?
Yeah, there are a few. I spend quite a lot of time reading and writing. So I really believe that there's a big difference between knowledge and understanding. And so if you really want to test yourself on how well you know something, then you need to be able to write it down. Because writing forces you to have to construct, your opinion and your point of view, and using the Richard Feynman technique of, I suppose the principle of simplicity. So you write it down, explain it to a 12-year-old, get your feedback, keep refining it until it gets simpler and simpler. And I think there's another part of that as well that is really useful, which comes from Charles Munger, who's Warren Buffett's business partner. He talks about, if you really want to feel that you understand something, you should be able to argue the opposing side very fluently. And so kind of inverting your thinking. And I think that's really important today because we are living in echo chambers and filter bubbles of information. And so I spend, quite a lot of time learning in the areas in which I'm working, as well as kind of self-development. I play music because it's, like another language to me. And, I take daily exercise, but the things I get the most out of are probably the learning and connecting with people I love and playing music. And then every month I try and get home to Sligo, which is where I'm from. So I have a deep spiritual connection with home. And it's really important to me. I start to feel really uncomfortable if I don't get to Sligo every couple of weeks. So yeah, they're kind of my rituals.
My next question is around where do you see the world right now, as particularly with in everything you've just articulated around what you're doing now and your own purpose as you see it.
Yeah, it is. It goes back to that big debate, isn't it, of Steve Pinker's philosophy of progress versus other people who believe we're not making progress at all. I mean, I think the main challenges that I hear from people. I do a good bit of informal mentoring, but things that I hear most from people is the level of overwhelm that they're experiencing, that I think is driven by anxiety and is driven by a lot of the noise that we've already talked about. And I suppose the need for people to, so I think people want to be able to slow down, but they can't. They feel they can't, and so they can't ask for what they need. And being able to articulate what they need becomes very difficult. And so I think that's the biggest trend for me over the last few years, before the pandemic or anything like that. I think in the last decade, certainly, I think the level of anxiety that we're seeing, and there's obviously an awful lot of mental health problems as well, but we're not good at tackling it because, we're only getting to grips with beginning to talk about it at a more open level as a society and in the world. But certainly on the, when you're bringing yourself to work, it gets complicated, when people are trying to understand each other. And so I do believe in solitude, and, that French philosopher's famous quote, Blaise Pascal, that said that all of man's or humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And I know so many people, might be listening to this thinking, well, that chance that's going to happen for me. I've got all these things I've got to do. But I think pressing pause, as all you folks in Below the Line used to say, is really, really important. I read a great book a few years ago called The Seventh Sense by a guy called Joshua Cooper. And it was all about the age of networks, driven, by technology, but not just technological networks, like what that will mean for, geopolitics, what it will mean for education, what it will mean for everything. And slightly, I suppose, depressingly, he said, what will the number one affliction in the 21st century will be insanity. Purely because we're not built for this. We're not made for this level of information, and to be taking in so much content and information constantly all day long, whether it's news or it's all the notifications or whatever it is. So I think that is the biggest challenge. If we've talked a lot about what it means to live well and perform better, and I'm in a very privileged position and have been able to invest in myself and take the time to do it. And yes, it takes courage and it takes tenacity, but ultimately it's a privilege to be able to do it. And I think if you can do it, you owe it to yourself to make that as an investment, because as Carl Jung says, the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. And so it's really important that people feel a sense of agency around understanding who they are. And I think at the moment, not the vast majority, but the vast majority of people I speak to who speak to me about this say that they're just really, really overwhelmed and can't really, unpack everything to understand where they're going, where they want to be going, what they want to be doing, and what they want to get out of life.
Yeah, my other colleague in Below the Line, Jerry Hussey, talks about the dis-ease of distraction, and the dis-ease that it causes within us and in our minds and our bodies, etc., etc. And I think, yeah, you've articulated that very well. And then my last question then, what's the one piece of advice you would give to anyone who's looking to live well and perform better in whatever way that might apply to them or mean to them?
I think it would be, in investing in understanding deep down what is it that matters to you, and it is an investment, but I think it's really important because it almost is the cornerstone. It's like a compass. Then it's a solid compass that won't promise you the sun, moon, and stars, won't give you everything you want, but it keeps you close to your values. I think if you don't understand what your values are, you can get really untethered and feel really discombobulated, which is a word I absolutely love and doesn't get used enough. But but that feeling, like you just said, that Jerry speaks a lot about as well, that dis-ease, you just feel out of sync with yourself and who you are, and you can't put your finger on it. And I think it's because people don't often know what it is they need. And I think your needs stem from your values. So it is this kind of systemic approach. I saw this brilliant visual the other day that is basically an iceberg. And using your language, there is, above the surface line and below the surface line. But at the tip of the iceberg, it kind of talks about there's loads of events that happen at the tip of the iceberg because it's exposed to the macro environment and it's constantly changing and shifting geologically. And then at the surface level, there's, you start to see the kind of patterns of erosion of what all those events are culminating in. And then below the surface, what you need to address is the kind of the structures associated with this iceberg and its, ultimate kind of sustainability. And at the very bottom are the mindsets. And so I think if you take that approach to understanding where you're at, what are the events that are happening for you that are really activating you or triggering you and disturbing you, and then what is that at a pattern level, and then below the surface, then you get into what are the structures that are in place in your life. Could be habits, could be rituals, could be all sorts of different contexts, to understand how to unpack that. And then what are the mindsets that we need to address that can help make that shift or help make that realization around, actually these are your values, or this is actually the most important thing in your life. Maybe it's being, a great father, or, maybe it's looking after your elderly parent, or whatever it is. It can be, doesn't have to be absolutely, world changing. But I think if you're not clear on that, I think your decisions can, the way you make decisions and the decisions you make can be precarious, and you can end up, I think, feeling in pretty deep water pretty quickly. So yeah, I think the investment is definitely worth it. Dave said to me last summer, he said, so what is, when you look back over the last decade, what are the things you've really learned? And I said, well, it comes from all the work I've done. And he said, well, what is the work? And I said, well, it's the work that we've done, this kind of very loose language and an implicit understanding that he knew what I was talking about. And he said, but I don't understand what you mean. And I said, of course you do. And he said, no, but what is it, Claire? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't have an atlas or a topology, but it got me really thinking about what is the work. So I started to create my own atlas of what it is. And I've done that to really understand what is my purpose in life? What are my values, my principles, my strengths, my weaknesses, and to be using it every day with humility to try and understand, where I'm going, but not being overly attached to it either. But it just helps me make sense of where I'm at and where I think I'm going. But yeah, I think the work is very important.
Fantastic. Listen, Claire, we'll draw to a close there, but I could talk to you for hours more. But it's been it's been fascinating. You've drawn all sorts of threads together, from philosophy to technology to music. It's been wonderful. So thanks very, very much for your time. And I wish you every success now with your next well, really, as you work out the next chapter, free from attachment.
Yeah, thanks a million, David. It was great. Thank you for inviting me.